Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today we're going to be looking at my latest Senate forecast. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And so, according to Rasmussen reports, the Senate candidates are running way behind Donald Trump in this election. This may be because the Republican Party in and of itself has an unpopular favorability rating with the general voting population, while Donald Trump seemingly has a higher approval rating with the Republican base and many independent voters. This is why you are seeing such a discrepancy in the polling data, but I am here to tell you that the discrepancy in some of the polling will not happen. In 2016, Republicans were supposed to outrun Donald Trump by, anywhere from single to double digits in many of the Senate races, and they ended up performing a little bit better than Donald Trump, in line with him or actually behind him. There was polling that had Illinois within 5 points for the Senate race in 2016. And when we look at the map, we see that Mark Kirk did end up going down by a pretty decent amount, almost the same amount that Hillary Clinton won the state by in 2016. And so all the hysteria of all of the polling data, having the candidates behind, should definitely not be a concern for Republicans in terms of a major blowout loss. However, there is a good chance that the Senate incumbents of Wisconsin, Baldwin, including Casey in Pennsylvania, will more than likely win re-election. The Stabenow Slotkin and Rogers race is a little bit different because Stabenow did step down and it is an open seat, so it is possible Rogers could pick it off. But again, the races tend to fall in line with the presidential trends more when it is a presidential year, because the top of the ticket tends to influence the vote a lot more. The environment is a lot different, and back in 2012, Klobuchar was able to outperform Obama by a pretty decent amount in the state. And so looking at the safe Republican states, we have Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, as well as Nebraska's special election, including the actual election in Nebraska, which has an independent candidate, Dan Osborne, running against the incumbent Fisher. However, I suspect that this race will still be over a 15-point win, as the polling data tends to underestimate Republicans in Nebraska. You can say the same thing for Tennessee as well as Mississippi. West Virginia being the first flip on the map. Yes, it is a flip. In 2018, we did actually see that Manchin ended up winning re-election very narrowly against a Republican who basically put no work into the Senate race. And what's very interesting is we can actually see, looking at some of the flips in 2018, it was very interesting because despite it being a super blue wave year, we had Florida flip, Missouri flipped, Indiana flipped, and North Dakota even flipped from Heitkamp. So that's pretty interesting. And Heitkamp was the incumbent and narrowly won in 2012. Now, if these Republicans were able to pull it out in a D+9 national environment, I can only imagine what would happen in a regular environment like the one we're about to have now. There were polls that had Donnelly leading by 7 points, their last poll, and Braun ended up winning by basically 6 points. McCaskill, the final polls had her up. She ended up losing by a decent amount, by 6 points in that race. Arizona and Nevada did flip, and those incumbents, except Sinema's not running, but Rosen is running again. And you see she's at 50%, but Rosen isn't even polling at 50%, which is pretty interesting. However, in my adjusted average, she's actually ahead by a pretty decent amount. Looking at some of the safe Democrat states, California in that column, Washington, as well as Hawaii, Minnesota, I think it's going to be safe. She always ends up winning by over 20 points. It probably will be closer this time, but definitely not over 20 points, and definitely not under 15 either. So 15 to 20 point range for Klobuchar in that race. She's going to outperform Harris by quite a bit. And on top of that, Harris is actually performing better in the state of Minnesota than Joe Biden. So That's, pretty much that. Bernie Sanders is going to win easily. Angus King will probably outrun Trump in Maine by a pretty decent amount. Maybe not by over 15. Maybe it's like a 13, 14 point win. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware are in the safe column as well. And Maryland, this one's interesting because you have the polling data having it really close, but these polls are underestimating Democrat voters, just like how regular polling is underestimating Republican voters in the general election on the presidential level. And so I think it's actually still going to be safe. It'll probably be about a 16, 17 point win for also Brooks. That's probably where I have it right now. If Hogan starts leading the data by like 10, 15 points, I'll probably drop it to likely. But they are underestimating Democrats by a bit. Like, they have Republicans at like 35, 40% of the sample, and then Democrats are at like 45, 40%, even though the electorate in 2020 was 61 to 35 Republicans. So they are definitely going to oversample. There is a response bias for Hogan in Maryland, like 100%. These two Senate races will be in the likely Democrat column, as well as Virginia. Tim Kaine is just too strong of an incumbent, even though, really Hung Kao is a really good candidate. Tim Kaine is just really strong, and Mitch McConnell isn't really helping any Republicans down ballot. And looking at Minnesota, New Mexico, kind of the same thing. They are running a pretty good Republican candidate here, but I do believe that the Democratic will probably pull it out by a couple points, maybe like 7 to 8 points. In Missouri, I think Hawley's going to win by about 12 to 13. Banks wins by a very similar amount to Texas. Cruz probably wins by 8 or 9. Allred, unlike what Let's Talk Elections will tell you, is not competitive in the state of Texas at all. He's just not competitive, and Cruz will more than likely win that seat by about 9 points. Florida, we have a similar thing. Rick Scott will probably win by about 9 points. Will probably underperform Trump by a few, but you have it at that. And then we have the major, basically 7 races for the Senate, and Republicans, even without the major races, are already at 50 seats because they already flipped West Virginia from the Democrats. Joe Manchin actually stepped down from that race because he did not want to get embarrassed politically from a major loss like that. So he is in fact going to be stepping down, and Jim Justice is the governor, Democrat turned Republican governor of West Virginia, is now running for that Senate seat. So he will more than likely end up winning that seat by double digits. It's not even consideration to be competitive. Now, looking at these major Senate races, the first one we have is Ohio. I believe Moreno's going to pull it out by 2 or 3 points. I have Donald Trump winning the state of Ohio by roughly 16 points, and I cannot see Moreno underperforming Donald Trump by that much. I do believe there's a problem. I genuinely believe that there is going to be a problem where the Republicans in the Senate level and in the House probably underperform Trump by a pretty extensive amount, more than most cycles, but I don't believe it's going to be by what the polls are insinuating. And the polls are underestimating Donald Trump's support, and they are underestimating the support for the candidates in the Senate. They are not going to get under 40%. Like some polls like to claim, or in the low 40s. It's just not going to happen during a presidential year. Even in these races, none of these candidates got below 40%, and you have polls that have them getting below that margin. So it just doesn't make any sense. And it's a presidential year. Donald Trump's going to be able to help out a little bit more. And if he's really winning Ohio by the margin I'm insinuating, he will more than likely carry Moreno over by 2 to 4 points in that race. Looking at some of the Rust Belt races, these are really tough because, they tend to vote in line with the winner. However, the problem with these races is the Democrat incumbents are a lot more favorable than what you would have, other ones. I think that more than likely Bob Casey probably pulls out the race in Pennsylvania, just because he's a very popular incumbent senator. I do think it's going to come down to 1 or 2 points. It's not going to be, high single digits or double digits loss like some of the polls are claiming. I think it's going to come down to a really close margin. Wisconsin, this one's interesting because this one, we actually had a poll with Hovde up in the race or even tied in some of the latest polls, but I do think he's going to underrun Donald Trump by a few points in the state. It really could go either way. I mean, he's up in my adjusted average. Both of them are at 47%. And in the last election, the Republican candidate got 44%. So Hovde's definitely going to outperform Volmik or whatever their name is, Volmir, whatever their name is. He's probably going to outperform them. But I think Tammy Baldwin may be the slight favorite to win that race. Now, Michigan's interesting. I actually have it going to Rogers because my model for the 2024 presidential election, which you guys can look at onpointpolitics.com, currently has Donald Trump winning the state of Michigan by around 2.5 points. And so I can't see Rogers underrunning Donald Trump by that much in Michigan to narrowly lose it. So I do think that Michigan will probably go to Rogers as of right now. The Montana Senate race, Tester at this point is done. You had an ad of him basically pretending to be a Trump Republican, even though he voted for Donald Trump's conviction in the Senate twice. He's really voted with Joe Biden a lot of the time during the presidency, and he did not help secure the border like he claims to have in his ad. And for him to be doing that, his internals must be absolutely abysmal. And in my adjusted average, he's losing by about 7 points. So he is pretty much done in that race. There's no way he is going to win that Senate race. And looking at Nevada and Arizona, these are some of the more hotly contested ones. Arizona is interesting because Donald Trump, in my model, again, is outperforming expectations. He's winning the state by a little bit over 5 points, and probably like 5.5. And so there is a possibility that Kari Lake does pull it out. I think it's very, very rough. I would say maybe Gallego narrowly wins the Senate race right now. It may be really close, really, really competitive, but I do have a gut feeling Gallego is going to probably eke that one out. And in Nevada, I do think Sam Brown probably will come out on top just because of the fact that the incumbent is really not polling that well. Like, Gallego is polling better than Gallego is polling at a higher vote share. The race is closer in terms of the spread. And even though the Nevada spread in the polling is a lot bigger, Rosen is only polling at, 44, 45%. Ruben Gallego's getting higher numbers than that. So that's why I'm a little bit more confident in Sam Brown's chances of winning that Senate race. And so that is it for this video. Donald Trump, right now wins the Senate with the Republicans at 54 Senate seats, the Democrats 46. If you guys want to see the latest betting odds for the Senate races, make sure to go to Bet Online. You can bet on some of these races. For example, Eric Hovde is the underdog essentially to win that race. If you were to bet $100, you would essentially get about 500 back. He's the very, very big underdog. You actually see even Tester is not even favored in the betting odds in Montana anymore. And I like this site more just because there is a little bit less skew towards the Democrats, because a lot of people who tend to bet on these elections actually tend to be a little bit more left leaning on Polymarket and Predict It. With these, you get a little bit more of a more basically balanced sample when it comes to who's on here. Kari Lake is the big underdog in this race as well, a little bit less than Hovde in Wisconsin, which I would argue would be the case. I think it's more likely Kari Lake wins than Hovde does just because of the margins in the individual states. McCormick is the super heavy underdog in that Senate race. I would not bet on him right now. And looking at Mike Rogers, I'd say there's a decent shot of him winning as of right now. And so make sure to go ahead and like the video down below, subscribe. Make sure to go ahead and follow me on X at onpointpolitics in all lowercase. I give updates on my adjusted average nationally and the states daily. And I am going to be updating the model as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.